joining us. This is the France 24 debate. We're looking at what seems to some, 2 years after the fall of Hosni Mubarak, as Egypt's endless revolution. With us to talk about it from Cairo, freelance reporter Bel TREW, and here in the studio from Fridley, Minnesota, Abdul, Mawgoud, or Dardery. Mr. Dardery, what brings you to Minnesota?
I am invited to the National Prayer Breakfast in D.C., attended by President Barack Obama. And I'm having a speaking tour in different cities, from Minnesota to Pennsylvania, Pittsburgh, PA, to New York. I will be speaking at the International Peace Institute, and then to the DC, and then flying to California, and then back to Egypt.
All right. A busy schedule. With us here in the studio, we have International Affairs Editor for flagship public radio station France Inter, Bernard Guetta, and Egyptian activist Hicham Ezzat. We were talking before the break about the move towards elections, no elections, the violence dragging on, how it's dragged down the economy. And now there's word that the IMF is waiting for those elections before signing on to a $4.8 billion loan. So how those elections take place matters a lot. Bel TREW, when we're talking about the economy, and you mentioned it, the economy sputtering and how so much hinges on the elections, I want to pick up on Abdul Mawgoud Dardary's point. What is the problem? Why not just hold the elections?
Well, this is an argument that is coming from the Muslim Brotherhood and, of course, the organisation, the Freedom Justice Party and the presidency. Let the people go to the ballot box and choose for themselves. I mean, speaking to protesters on the streets and the opposition forces, what they're saying is we've had multiple elections. We've had parliamentary elections already. We've had presidential elections. We've had a referendum on the constitution. And yet here we are with 60 people dead, mass uprisings across the country, a poor economy, no police reform. Basically, local governance is in a state. The country's, for example, the transport system. We've had dozens killed on Egypt's railways. Nothing's changed, even though the people have gone to the ballot box and voted. So, I mean, that's what the opposition say. In addition, they don't really see this system as working. During the referendum, they said that they wouldn't want to go to the ballot box because they didn't believe the way that the constitution had been drafted was legitimate. They see this parliamentary elections coming up is also illegitimate because they don't believe that President Mohamed Morsi should be in power during this period. So it's difficult to say what's going to happen. I mean, in the background of violence, I can't see how these elections would happen at this moment in time with continued unrest. But Egypt has had a lot of unrest the last 2 years. They have managed to go to the polling stations and had results. Really, I think what people, the expressions of anger on the streets at the moment are people saying they don't believe that the current government is legitimate. I mean, we're having protesters marching on the Shura Council, which is the upper house of parliament, in place of there being no lower house of parliament. That they're marching on this building for a reason, not just because it's a building of the government, but because it is the parliament they see as illegitimate. So they're not going to participate in parliamentary elections. All right, we've still got several months yet, so we'll see.
Yeah, and I was going to say, as we mentioned at the outset, this flare-up in violence prompting this message by the head of the army, warning of perhaps a collapse of the state. General Abdel Fattah el-Sisi's strongly worded comments to cadets were then relayed on Facebook and on state television. And Bernard Guetta, how to interpret that? Is this mean the army wants to be a player, or is the army playing referee? What's going on?
No, I don't think the generals want to be the players now again. Why? Because the situation is so bad that this is impossible to govern this country, to run this country. And so I don't think they wish to take responsibility directly. But they obviously wish to be a kind of shadow cabinet, acting in the shadow. And they are pushing both the Muslim Brotherhood and the secular party to try to reach a compromise and to govern together. And but unfortunately, apparently, President Morsi doesn't want that. in any case, not before the elections.
No.
And there is a very urgent situation now. And there is a very urgent situation because let me tell you that the fact is that there is a pure anarchy in this country. The government cannot govern. It cannot count on the army, nor on the police, nor on the political party, nor on the left out, nor on the urban middle class.
So how come? What's going on here? Because remember, 2 months ago, there was Mohamed Morsi on the cover of Time magazine. We've had guests come on the show saying how much they've been surprised by how.
Maybe Time magazine was wrong, you know. Maybe Time magazine was wrong because the situation was quite obvious already in December. And why? Because the truth is that it was impossible to make miracles in this country. But the fact also is that the Muslim Brotherhood was elected and is running the country. And so the anger, the social anger of the population, not only the left out of the population, is directed now against the Muslim Brotherhood. This is a fatality for the Muslim Brothers, but this is a fact.
One more question about the army. On Twitter, Ahmed Said of the Liberal Opposition Free Egyptians Party in Port Said said, "Will the army intervene on the side of the Egyptian people or not?" Hicham, Ezzat, do you want the army to intervene?
What we have seen in Egypt since the December clashes that happened near the presidential palace, we really feel that there is another play going on the background, which is a play run by the Mohammed Shafiq, which was the second in the presidential elections, which was placed second in the presidential election and that lost in front of Mohamed Morsi, and who represents for most of the revolutionary groups and the revolutionary community represents the continuity of the Mubarak regime and the continuity of the ruling of the army through a puppet in the front. So we really feel that these pro-Shafiq movements pushed to this violent confrontation between the revolutionary that just wanted Morsi to cancel his constitutional declaration, but didn't want him to step down. They just wanted Morsi to cancel his declaration that gave him full powers. But these forces pushed the revolutionary community to clash and to request more from
But
Mohamed
you
Morsi.
personally, what do you want to see
But
the army?
the army actually has been running Egypt for more than 60 years.
But do you want to see the army intervene?
And this is no, the army intervening will not solve anything. The army is not able of running the country, and I think Tantawi has showed us, the head of the SCAF has showed us for a year and a half that they are unable to run the country, as Morsi is unable to run the country. The problem in Egypt is that when power is taken, it's taken by people who are afraid of losing it. When you are afraid of losing it, you don't put people of ability in positions. You put people of trust in responsibility positions, so they are unable to do their work, but at least they will not hit me in the back. This is really the policy that is going on, and that is exactly the policy that is run by the Muslim Brotherhood more than anyone else, putting people of confidence in positions of strength instead of putting people of ability. This is why we have a government that is unable to run the country today.
Are you unable to run the country, you say? Abdul Mawgoud Dardery, how do you feel about the fact that, for the time being at least, the army still gets to name its own defense minister?
Let me tell you first, how do I feel in a setting like this? I feel very much underrepresented because I hear lots of unqualified statements about what's happening in Egypt, and they all really need a rebuttal, and I may not have enough time to rebuttal each and every statement. But I think what's happening in New Egypt is we're having an opposition that is very weak and that is detached from the from the people of Egypt. And that's why, unfortunately, they're allying with the remnants of Mubarak regime. And that's why, until today, the so-called Salvation Front, that many people in Egypt call it Destruction Front, has not condemned the killings of innocent Egyptians in the streets of Egypt. So with such an opposition, it makes life difficult for Egyptians. It makes life difficult for the government. It is a transitional period. Let us not forget we're still in a transitional period. It is going to take some time. We've been ruled by dictatorship for 60 years. You don't expect miracles in 6 months or even 1 year or 2 years. So it is going to take some time.
But do you feel? But do you feel a little bit beleaguered? Let me just show you some images here. This was the police getting angry at their interior minister. They say they're undermanned and under-equipped to handle the situation. On Sunday, they forced out the interior minister, Mohammed Ibrahim, out of the Port Said funeral of 2 policemen killed in the protests. Do you feel a little bit overwhelmed, Abdul Mawgoud Dardery?
That's why the need for the military to intervene. I am aware of the anger in the streets, but unfortunately, this anger is supported also by violent remnants of Mubarak's regime. That's why the army had to intervene. And the army is an Egyptian army to intervene to secure cities and secure civilians and secure an institution. This is very common practice, not only in Egypt, even here in the United States. Sometimes they make use of extra force to be able to secure when normal human beings, normal Egyptians are killed in the streets. Someone has had to intervene, and that's why the Egyptian president invited the army to intervene. But that does not mean an interference in the political setup. Politics is to be done on a civilian, and this is a great success President Morsi did, as he told the military, your job is clear, this is what you need to do. And the politicians have to be able to sit and dialogue. I really don't know why the opposition forces refused the dialogue President Morsi called for so many times. The only way out of the existing political crisis, twofold. One is dialogue, second is election. And all of us have to listen to the Egyptian people when they speak out.
Let me ask Bel TREW about this. The state of emergency declared, that seemed to really raise a lot of alarm bells among protesters.
Yes, I mean, obviously Egypt was under 30 years of emergency law during the Mubarak regime, which saw protests banned, censorship legalized, security forces able to arrest citizens and detain them for multiple days with no charge. So as soon as they heard this across the 3 cities, Port Said, Suez and Ismailia, people, including human rights organizations who've asked for this to be revoked, were very alarmed. So they feared that with also the additional rights given to the army for arrest, this is a new law that was drafted by the cabinet the day after, that would see a lot of civilians being arrested and facing military trials. The military trials for civilians campaign has been one of the key ones of the revolution. But in addition to the curfew as well, rights groups have been talking against this curfew, although obviously people have been violating it with a fear that many people would be facing prison sentences, and that there'll be further bloodshed as security forces and protesters meet on the streets. I mean, so far the emergency status hasn't seemed to have. I mean, obviously the violence has died down slightly, but there still seems to be a lot of unrest. We have yet to see whether it's a successful move or not.
And the curfew being eased in some parts, Bel TREW. The U.S., by the way, which continues to keep the channels open with the Army, providing $1.3 billion in aid last year. There's a look at what Egypt's Army's makeup is there. Is also standing by President Morsi. Take a listen to the State Department briefing on Monday.
I would say that we've been gratified to see the president and his government renew their call for national dialogue to avoid further violence and to find a peaceful way to move forward. We call on all political forces in Egypt to avail themselves of this opportunity to work together through dialogue to deal with the underlying issues. That's obviously something that would have been unheard of in times past in Egypt.
But the opposition or the national dialogue was rejected by almost every other group except for the Muslim Brotherhood. So do you have any comment on that?
Again, in all of these situations, first of all, concerns about the course that the country is on should be expressed peacefully. There's never an excuse for violence, not on the protester side, not on the government side. And when national dialogue is offered, it should at least be tried. That is our view.
Bel TREW, how are remarks like that going down in Tahrir Square?
I think there's an overemphasis on comments from the West on the situation in Egypt. Here in Tahrir, just off Tahrir and other parts of the country, there's a sort of fear of Western influence and a general sort of not really believing what the West are saying. Of course, there's been a lot of condemnation of the violence coming from the UK, from the EU, from Germany today, in addition to America, who all say the same thing. They're calling for dialogue, they're calling for restraint, they're calling for human rights to be enshrined or adhered to. But people here, protesters here, you know, they're fed up of the West having a say in what goes on in Egypt. I'm merely quoting what people have said to me today. You know, they believe that the Muslim Brotherhood as an organisation spends a lot of time speaking to the West. There was a condemnation of President Morsi leaving the country to go to Germany today to try and negotiate whatever financial things he's looking for. Basically, people here are saying that they want it to be a domestic issue that should be solved domestically.
And he shouldn't be abroad. He was supposed to go to Paris, Bernard Guetta.
Yes,
he did not go.
No.
Now, off the record, people at the French presidential palace after the cabinet meeting said that it was because of the situation back home. But
Certainly, yes.
But was it also because he made statements last week condemning France's intervention in Mali?
I don't think so. I don't think so. Not at all. Not at all. It was because of the political and social situation in Egypt. He had no time for France. And that is that simple. But let's come back to the State Department. I would say that the United States are perfectly right in wishing a national dialogue in Egypt. But question, a dialogue for what? If it is just to share a cup of tea, it's not interesting and it's not useful. If it is to build up a political consensus in the country, perfect, wishable, necessary. If it is to organize a national salvation government, perfect, wishable, a necessity. If it is only for a cup of tea, no.
That's not worth it. And that'll be our final word. Bernard Guetta, I want to thank you. I want to thank as well Hicham Ezzat for being with us in the studio. Abdul Mawgoud Dardery for joining us from just outside of Minneapolis in Minnesota. And Bel TREW in Cairo. And thank you for joining us here in the France 24 debate.